What happens when the biggest night in New York society becomes the stage for the most brutal betrayal? We're not talking about a business deal gone wrong. We're talking about a husband, a billionaire titan named Damien Hawthorne, forcing his 8 months pregnant wife to stay home from a gala. His reason? Her health. The truth. He was dressing his mistress in his wife's custom-made Oscar de la Renta gown and putting her on the red carpet instead. This is the story of Elara Vance, the woman who was told to rest but chose to fight. It's a story of a stolen identity, a public confrontation, and how one man, the head of a billion-dollar security firm, made a choice that brought an empire to its knees in a single night. Stick around, because you won't believe how it ends. The penthouse at 157 wasn't so much a home as it was a glass and marble fortress in the sky. From the 75th floor, Elara Vance could see all of Manhattan sprawling beneath her, a glittering carpet of dreams and ambition. Yet most days, she felt like a Rapunzel figure trapped in a tower of her husband's making. The view was breathtaking, but the air was thin, rarefied, and lonely. Damien Hawthorne didn't just own a piece of the city. He owned a piece of its soul. Hawthorne Dynamics was a behemoth, its tentacles wrapped around global logistics, private equity, and cutting-edge tech. He was a man who moved markets with a single phone call, whose granite-carved features graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. And Elara, the quiet art historian, from a good but not exorbitantly wealthy family, as was his wife. His beautiful, intelligent, and now very pregnant wife. Their son. That was the one pure, unassailable joy in her life. She was 8 months along, and the baby was a constant, reassuring presence. A tiny flutter of life that promised something real in a world constructed of artifice and appearances. "You're looking tired, darling," Damien said, his voice smooth as the aged scotch in his glass. He adjusted the knot of his Tom Ford tie, his reflection staring back from the floor-to-ceiling window. He was already in his tuxedo for the Starlight Philanthropy Gala, the undisputed social event of the autumn season. Just a little, Elara admitted, shifting on the plush sofa. Her own gown, a bespoke Oscar de la Renta in a shade of celestial blue, designed to accommodate her baby bump, hung in its garment bag on their bedroom door, a silent promise of the evening to come. She had been looking forward to it, a rare chance to feel like herself again, not just a vessel for the next Hawthorne heir. "That's why I've made a decision," Damien continued, turning to face her. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a look he often used when closing a deal. Paternalistic concern layered over unshakable authority. "I don't think you should go tonight." Elara's heart did a slow, painful dip. "What, Damien? We've been planning this for months." "I feel fine, really. The doctor said a few hours out would be perfectly safe. Doctors don't understand the pressures of an event like this," he dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The flashing lights, the endless, standing the sycophants, it's too much of a risk. I won't have you or my son exposed to that." He walked over and placed a cool hand on her belly. It was meant to be a gesture of love, but it felt like an act of ownership. "Your job is to rest, to keep him safe. My job is to represent us. I'll make our apologies." Arguing with Damien was like arguing with a tidal wave. You could stand your ground, but you would only end up exhausted and swept away. She knew this was not about her health. It was about control. Lately, his control had been tightening into a stranglehold. Her meetings with friends were subtly audited. Her credit card statements were reviewed under the guise of household accounting. and her phone calls were often interrupted by his coincidental need to speak with her. He saw her swollen ankles, her occasional fatigue, not as normal parts of pregnancy, but as imperfections. Damien Hawthorne did not tolerate imperfection. But the dress, Fernando worked so hard on it, she said, her voice small. It will keep. We'll have another occasion, he said, his tone final. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. The kiss was as sterile as the apartment around them. I've had Chef prepare your favorite risotto, and I've asked Marcus to double the detail on the building tonight. No one will disturb you. Marcus Thorne. The name was a comfort and a curiosity. He was the head of Damien's personal security, a former Special Forces operator with a quiet intensity that set him apart from the other broad-shouldered men in suits. He was unfailingly polite to Alara, his eyes holding a flicker of something she could never quite decipher. Pity, perhaps, or respect. He was the only person in Damien's orbit who didn't seem to view her as an accessory. Thank you, Damien, she murmured, the fight draining out of her. Good girl, he said, patting her head as one would a dog. I'll be home late. Don't wait up. He strode out of the room, a titan in his prime, leaving Alara alone with the silent city, the scent of his Creed Aventus cologne, and the crushing weight of the gilded cage he had built around her. She looked at the blue gown hanging on the door. It wasn't just a dress. It was a symbol of a life she was meant to be living, a life that was happening somewhere else without her. A bitter, metallic taste filled her mouth, and for the first time she allowed a dangerous thought to take root. This wasn't protection. This was imprisonment. And as she sat there cradling her unborn son, she felt a slow, simmering rage begin to burn away the fog of compliance she had lived in for so long. In a sleek, minimalist apartment in Tribeca, paid for by a Hawthorne Dynamics subsidiary. Isabella Rossi was transforming. She was a woman carved from ambition, with sharp cheekbones, eyes like polished obsidian, and a mind that moved as quickly as the stock ticker she monitored daily. Isabella had started as a junior analyst at Hawthorne Dynamics, but she had no intention of staying at the bottom. She saw power, and she moved toward it with the lethal grace of a shark. Her target had been Damien Hawthorne. It hadn't been difficult. She recognized in him the same hunger for perfection, the same disdain for weakness. She wasn't soft and intellectual like his wife. She was fire and steel. "Is the car ready?" she asked into her phone, her voice a husky purr. She was examining herself in a full-length mirror, turning this way and that. "The Maybach is waiting downstairs." Ms. Rossi came the clipped reply from one of Damien's drivers. Isabella smiled. The dress was a masterpiece, celestial blue with delicate hand-stitched crystals that shimmered like captured starlight. An Oscar de la Renta. It had been altered, of course. Her own frame was willowy and athletic, a stark contrast to the soft maternal curves it was designed for. The tailor, sworn to secrecy with a bonus that could buy a new car, had worked a miracle taking it and making it hers. Damien had presented it to her 2 days ago in this very apartment. "Alara is unwell," he had said, swirling a glass of wine. "Too delicate for public appearances. But the Hawthorne name must be represented with grace and beauty. The seat at my table cannot be empty." Isabella hadn't feigned sympathy. She understood the transaction. She was the stand-in, the understudy stepping into the spotlight. But in her mind, she was auditioning for the lead role. "It's beautiful, Damien," she'd breathed, running a hand over the luxurious fabric. But it's her dress. It's a dress, he corrected her firmly. And tonight, it belongs to the woman by my side. It belongs to you. That was all she needed to hear. She saw Elara as a placeholder, a temporary inconvenience, a woman who had won the prize but didn't know how to hold on to it. Pregnancy in Isabella's eyes was a liability, a biological weakness that had made Elara soft and sentimental. Damien, a man who worshipped strength, was growing tired of it. Isabella could feel it. She was making herself indispensable, not just in the bedroom, but in his business. She fed him snippets of market intelligence, ruthless strategies he could claim as his own. She was a partner, an asset. Elara was just the mother of his child. Now, as she fastened the clasp of a Cartier diamond necklace, a little something for the evening from Damien, she felt a surge of triumph. This wasn't just about attending a gala. This was a public declaration. The society pages, the gossip columns, the photographers, they would all see Damien Hawthorne with a stunning, vibrant woman on his arm. They would see power, not domesticity. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Damien. "Be brilliant." She smiled. She was always brilliant. She took one last look in the mirror. The blue dress clung to her like a second skin. She looked like a queen. Elara's dress. Elara's jewels. Elara's husband. It all felt so right. It was a rehearsal for the life she was methodically, ruthlessly building. As she swept out of her apartment, the doorman bowing low, she didn't feel a flicker of guilt. Guilt was an emotion for the weak, for those who waited for things to be given to them. Isabella Rossi was not a woman who waited. She was a woman who took. And tonight, she was taking center stage. The world would see her on Damien Hawthorne's arm, and they would all ask the same question. Who is she? And soon, very soon, the answer would be the next Mrs. Hawthorne. The risotto was tasteless, turning to ash in Elara's mouth. She pushed the bowl away and wandered through the silent penthouse. The silence was the worst part. It was a living thing, amplifying her anxieties, giving them space to grow into monstrous shapes. Damien's excuse about her health felt thin, flimsy. He'd never been this cautious before. She drifted into their master bedroom, a vast space of cool greys and chrome. Her eyes landed on the blue gown still hanging on the door. On impulse, she reached out her fingers, tracing the delicate embroidery. It was then that she saw it. Tucked into the folds of the garment bag, almost invisible, was a small square card. It was the tailor's tag. Alterations for Ms. I. Rossi. Rush order. I. Rossi. The name hit her like a physical blow. Isabella Rossi, a notoriously ambitious analyst from Damien's mergers and acquisitions department. Elara had met her once at a company holiday party. She remembered a cold, assessing gaze and a handshake that was all sharp angles and ambition. Damien had praised her work, calling her a real killer instinct. Why would Isabella Rossi's name be on a tag for her dress? Her mind began to race, connecting disparate, nagging thoughts from the past few weeks. The scent of a different perfume. Baccarat Rouge, 540. A scent she knew Isabella wore, lingering on Damien's suit jacket one evening. The late-night calls he took in his study, his voice low and intimate. The business dinners that stretched past midnight. She felt a wave of nausea so profound it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She stumbled back and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands protectively wrapped around her stomach. It couldn't be. Damien wouldn't be so brazen, so cruel. To take her dress, the one meant to celebrate her and their child, and give it to another woman. The humiliation of it was a physical pain. Her hands trembling, she picked up her tablet and opened her browser. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing in Starlight Philanthropy, Gala 2025 live stream. A feed from one of the major news outlets popped up instantly. The red carpet. The screen was filled with the blinding flash of cameras and the cacophony of reporters shouting names. And then the black Hawthorne Maybach pulled up. Damien stepped out impossibly handsome, a king surveying his court. He turned, extending a hand to help his passenger. Elara's breath hitched in her throat. Out of the car stepped a woman in a celestial blue gown. The dress shimmered under the lights, a perfect river of silk and starlight. On the woman's neck was a diamond necklace Elara recognized the Hawthorne star, a family heirloom she was meant to inherit upon the birth of their son. It was Isabella Rossi. She was smiling a predator's smile as she took Damien's arm. They posed for the cameras, a perfect power couple. The reporters were shouting questions. Elara could lip-read one of them. "Who's your lovely date, Mr. Hawthorne?" Damien leaned into the microphone, his smile never faltering. "This is Isabella Rossi, one of our firm's most brilliant consultants, a rising star." The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from Elara's lungs. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a fact broadcast in high definition for the entire world to see. A lie. A monstrous, calculated public lie. He hadn't just replaced her for the night. He was erasing her. He was showing the world his new model, his upgrade. In that moment, something inside Elara shifted. The hurt, the shock, the betrayal, they didn't break her. They forged themselves into something hard and sharp. A cold, clear fury, unlike anything she had ever felt. He had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. He had mistaken her pregnancy for fragility. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the tablet. She saw a woman on the verge of motherhood, a woman who had been humiliated and discarded. But she also saw a flicker of the person she used to be before Damien, strong, resilient, and unwilling to be a footnote in her own life story. He wanted her to stay home, to be quiet, to disappear. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked to her closet, past the rows of designer clothes Damien had chosen for her. She ignored them all. Instead, she pulled out a simple, elegant black cashmere dress she had owned long before she met him. It was comfortable, understated, and most importantly, it was hers. She slipped it on. It stretched taut over her belly, a clear and proud declaration of the life she carried. She found a pair of flat, sensible shoes. She didn't need heels for the war she was about to wage. She grabbed her phone, her purse, and the tailor's tag from the garment bag. It was a small piece of evidence, but it was the truth. Her son kicked a strong, insistent thump against her ribs, as if he too could sense the shift in the atmosphere. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her hand on her belly. "Mummy's just going to go set the record straight." She walked out of the bedroom, her purpose clear. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to cry. She was going to the gala, and she was going to reclaim her name. The journey from the penthouse to the Metropolitan Grand Ballroom was a blur of neon lights and suffocating fury. Elara had bypassed Damien's fleet of drivers, instead using an app to call a generic black car service. The driver, a kind man named Hector, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. A heavily pregnant woman, alone, dressed in simple black with a storm in her eyes, was not his usual fare. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked gently, as they hit traffic on Fifth Avenue. "Everything will be," Elara replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. With every passing block, her resolve hardened. This was not a rash, emotional decision. It was a calculated act of self-preservation. She thought about the prenuptial agreement Damien's lawyers had slid in front of her, a document so ironclad it would leave her with virtually nothing if she was the one to cause a public scandal. Damien had called it a formality, a protection for his legacy. Now she saw it for what it was, another bar on her cage designed to ensure her silence. He was counting on her being too scared, too ashamed, too dignified to ever challenge him. He didn't know his wife at all. As they pulled up a block away from the Gala's main entrance, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Police barricades held back crowds of onlookers and a ravenous pack of paparazzi. The red carpet was still teeming with late arrivals. Elara knew she couldn't go through the front. Damien's security would have her name on a list of people to be barred entry. "Can you let me out here, please?" she asked Hector, pressing a generous tip into his hand. "And thank you." He nodded. "Good luck, ma'am. Whatever it is." She slipped out of the car and into the cool night air, pulling the collar of her coat up. She bypassed the main entrance and headed for the service delivery entrance at the side of the building, a place she remembered from a previous events planning committee. It was her only chance. The security guard at the service entrance was a burly man named Frank, whose world-weary expression suggested he'd seen it all. "Can't come through here, miss. Main entrance is around front," he said, not even looking up from his tabloid. "I'm Elara Vance." "Mrs. Hawthorne," she said, her voice clear and firm. Frank finally looked up, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. He'd seen her picture in the papers. He looked her up and down, the simple black dress, the obvious pregnancy, the lack of entourage. Confusion warred with protocol on his face. "Mrs. Hawthorne, Mr. Hawthorne is already inside." "I know. There's been a misunderstanding with my invitation. Could you please just radio your head of security?" "His name is Marcus Thorne. Tell him Elara Hawthorne is at the west service entrance." She used her married name deliberately. It was a key, and she was going to use it to unlock this door. The guard hesitated, his hand hovering over his radio. He had orders. Mr. Hawthorne was not to be disturbed. But this was his wife, his very pregnant wife. Denying her entry felt wrong, and potentially a career-ending mistake if she was telling the truth. "Please, Elara," said her voice, softening just a fraction. "It's very important." The sincerity in her eyes, the sheer force of her will, seemed to sway him. With a sigh, he keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Frank at West Service. I have a VIP query. Can you get a message to Marcus Thorne? Tell him Mrs. Hawthorne is here." The radio crackled back a confused response, but the message was relayed. Elara stood there, her heart pounding against her ribs, waiting. Every second felt like an hour. She was exposed, vulnerable. What if Marcus simply followed Damien's orders? What if he had been instructed to keep her away? After what felt like an eternity, the service door hissed open. Marcus Thorne stood there, his imposing frame filling the doorway. He was in a perfectly tailored suit, an earpiece in his ear. His expression, an unreadable mask of professionalism. But his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of shock. He took in her appearance, his gaze lingering for a moment on her belly, before returning to her face. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice a low baritone. "I was told you were unwell." "I'm feeling much better," Elara replied, her chin held high. "I'm here to join my husband." Marcus was silent for a long moment. He was a man paid handsomely for his loyalty to Damien Hawthorne. His job was to eliminate problems, to maintain order. And Elara, standing here, was a massive unforeseen problem. She could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was weighing his duty to his employer against something else. His duty to a pregnant woman being publicly humiliated. A flicker of basic human decency. He looked past her at the street, then back at her face. He saw no hysteria, no frantic emotion. He saw only a cold, unbreakable resolve. He had seen that look before in soldiers going into battle. Finally, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He stepped aside. "This way, ma'am," he said, his voice betraying nothing. He spoke into the radio on his lapel. "Thorne to command. I have the package. I'm escorting her personally." The package. The clinical term sent a chill down her spine, but she ignored it. He was letting her in. That was all that mattered. As she walked past him into the fluorescent-lit corridor, she felt a silent transfer of power. Marcus Thorne had made a choice. He was not going to stop her. He was going to escort her to the heart of the storm. The service corridors of the Metropolitan Grand Ballroom were a world away from the glamour of the main event. Here the air smelled of industrial cleaning fluid and cooking oil. The sound of the orchestra was a dull, muffled throb through thick concrete walls. Marcus Thorne led the way, walking half a pace ahead of her. He didn't speak, but his presence was a solid, calming force at her back. His team, alerted via his earpiece, had melted into the shadows, creating a discreet perimeter around them. They were professionals moving with an unnerving silence. Elara's mind was a maelstrom of fear and fury. What was she going to do? What was she going to say? She had no plan beyond confronting Damien. The thought of the hundreds of eyes that would be on her, the judgment, the whispers, was terrifying. But the image of Isabella in her dress on her husband's arm burned hotter than any fear. They stopped at a heavy set of double doors. From within, the sounds of conversation, laughter and music swelled. This was it. The entrance to the main ballroom. Marcus turned to face her, his expression still neutral, but his eyes searching hers. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice low and for her ears only. "Once you walk through these doors, nothing will be the same. Are you certain this is what you want?" It was her last chance to turn back, to return to the penthouse, to let the humiliation pass, to deal with it privately, to swallow the poison and pretend it didn't burn. But she knew that if she turned back now, she would be lost forever. She would be accepting the role he had assigned her, the quiet, compliant, invisible wife. "My husband is in there with another woman who is wearing my dress and my family's jewels," she stated, her voice devoid of any tremor. "He is trying to erase me. The only thing I am not certain of, Mr. Thorne, is why it took me this long to stop letting him." A flicker of something respect, maybe even admiration, crossed his face. He nodded once. "Stay close to me." He pushed the doors open. The scene that greeted them was a sensory assault. A vast, cavernous room dripping with crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse flowers. A sea of New York's elite, dressed in their finest, glittered and chattered. A string orchestra played Vivaldi. It was a perfect picture of opulence and order, and Elara in her simple black dress was the single discordant note. The moment she stepped through the doors, a ripple of silence began to spread from their location. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. A guest holding a champagne flute froze mid-sip. The sight was incongruous. The heavily pregnant Mrs. Hawthorne, who was supposed to be at home on bed rest, appearing on the arm of her husband's head of security. The whispers started immediately, a sibilant hiss that spread through the ballroom like a gas leak. "Is that Elara Hawthorne? I thought she was ill. Look what she's wearing. What is going on?" Elara ignored them. Her eyes scanned the room, searching. And then she saw them. Damien and Isabella were at the head table on a slightly raised dais holding court. Damien was laughing, his head tilted back, the picture of a man without a care in the world. Isabella was seated beside him, radiant in the celestial blue dress, her hand resting possessively on his arm. They were the king and his new queen. Damien's eyes, drawn by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, swept across the crowd. They landed on Elara. For a split second, his mask of charming indifference fell away. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. His eyes narrowed into icy slits. He had been publicly defied. His perfect evening, his carefully constructed narrative was being threatened. Elara saw his expression, and she did not flinch. She held his gaze across the cavernous room. The battle had begun. She took a step forward, then another, Marcus Thorne, a silent, imposing shadow at her side. She was no longer just entering a party. She was walking onto a battlefield, and the entire world was watching. Every step Elara took felt both impossibly slow and terrifyingly fast. The sea of faces parted before her, a mixture of shock, pity, and salacious curiosity on their features. The orchestra, sensing the seismic shift in the room's tension, faltered and then fell silent. The only sounds were the rustle of silk, the clinking of ice in glasses, and the frantic, hushed whispers. Damien rose from his chair, his movements stiff with rage. He had regained his composure, his face a mask of cold fury. Isabella remained seated, her hand still on his arm, her expression a carefully crafted look of confused concern, as if she were the innocent victim in all of this. Elara stopped a few feet from the dais, creating a no-man's land between them. All eyes in the room were locked on this silent, tense triangle. Elara Damien's voice was dangerously low, a velvet glove over a mailed fist. "What are you doing here? You should be at home. You're not well." He was playing his part, the concerned husband, dealing with his emotional, perhaps unstable pregnant wife. "I was unwell." "Damien," Elara said, her voice clear and strong, carrying through the cavernous, silent room. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Every person was straining to hear her. But the fresh air seems to have done me a world of good. She let her eyes drift from his face to Isabella, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable under the direct gaze. Elara's eyes swept over the celestial blue gown, a slow, deliberate inspection. "That's a beautiful dress." Elara said, her tone conversational, but edged with steel. "Oscar de la Renta, isn't it? He's a genius. He designed one just like it for me. In fact, it was meant to be delivered this morning." Isabella paled slightly. The directness of the attack had caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to speak, but Damien cut her off. "Elara, "This is neither the time nor the place," he hissed, taking a step forward. "You are making a scene." "I am making a scene." Elara's voice rose just a fraction, laced with incredulous fire. "You stand here in front of everyone with your mistress, who you have dressed in my clothes, and I am the one making a scene." A collective gasp went through the room. The accusation so bluntly stated hung in the air like poison. The word mistress had been spoken. There was no coming back from this. Isabella finally found her voice. "I have no idea what she's talking about," she said, trying to project an aura of wounded dignity. "Damien and I are colleagues. He invited me as his guest because his wife was ill." My colleague Damien repeated, latching onto the word. "Elara. You are overwrought. Your hormones are making you paranoid. Let's go home and discuss this in private." He reached for her arm, intending to physically remove her, to manhandle her out of the spotlight and regain control. But before his fingers could touch her, Marcus Thorne took a half step forward, subtly but decisively, placing himself between them. Damien's hand stopped in mid-air. The message was unmistakable. "Don't touch her." Damien shot Marcus a look of pure venom, a promise of retribution, but for now he was blocked. This was Elara's moment. She reached into her small purse and pulled out the tailor's tag. She held it up. "You're right, we should discuss this. Let's discuss this alteration tag. The rush order you paid for Damien. It has Ms. Rossie's name on it. For alterations on a maternity gown. It's funny, isn't it? I didn't realize Ms. Rossie was expecting." The room erupted in a maelstrom of shocked murmurs and the clicking of phone cameras. This was it. The proof. The small, undeniable piece of truth that tore their entire lie to shreds. Isabella's face, which had been a mask of cool composure, finally crumbled. Humiliation, stark and ugly, flooded her features. She looked at Damien, her eyes pleading for him to fix this, to do something. But Damien's focus was entirely on Elara. The public nature of his downfall was his worst nightmare. He had built his entire life around an image of impenetrable power and control, and his quiet, unassuming wife had just demolished it with a piece of cardboard in front of the most influential people in the city. His face contorted into a snarl of pure hatred. The mask was gone. The monster was out. "You foolish little girl!" He spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You have just destroyed yourself. You will have nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing!" He lunged for her again, this time with real menace. "Marcus," he roared. "Get her out of here. Get this hysterical woman out of my sight, now!" The entire room held its breath. Every eye was on Marcus Thorne, the head of security. His employer, the man who paid him a fortune, had given him a direct order. His loyalty, his career, his future, it all hung in the balance of this single moment. Marcus Thorne did not move. He stood as a fulcrum upon which an entire dynasty teetered. The air in the ballroom, once filled with the murmur of 1,000 trivial conversations, was now so thin and silent it felt like the moments before a lightning strike. Damien Hawthorne's order, a roar of absolute possession. Remove her, hung in the crystalline air, an artifact of a power that had just evaporated. His authority, once as solid as the marble floors, had become a ghost. Damien's face, a mask of apoplectic rage, began to crumble into something far more pathetic confusion. His brain, a finely tuned instrument of command and control, could not process the insubordination. He looked at Marcus, the man who was an extension of his own will. and saw a stranger. He looked at his wife, the woman who was a beautiful, compliant accessory, and saw a warrior. The world he had meticulously constructed, where all people were merely pawns or assets, was dissolving in real time. "Marcus, did you hear me?" Damien yelled again, but his voice was different now, threaded with the first chilling notes of panic. "This is a direct order. Remove her." The silence that answered him was his true executioner. It was a collective judgment from the very people he sought to dominate. In their hundreds of eyes, he saw not fear or respect, but a morbid, ravenous fascination. They were watching a god bleed. Marcus turned his head with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who has already calculated every possible outcome and chosen his path. He did not spare another glance for the sputtering billionaire. His gaze found two of his senior team leaders, David and Leo, who had seamlessly integrated themselves into the periphery of the dais. Marcus gave a single, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. It was the signal for the Kingfall Protocol, a contingency so extreme they had only ever practiced it in sterile simulations. It was designed for a scenario where the client, the king, became a direct threat to the mission's primary objective, which Marcus had redefined months ago as the safety of Ilara and her unborn child. The protocol was simple: the king is contained. The principle is extracted. Having issued his silent command, Marcus pivoted a full formal turn that placed him squarely at Ilara's side. He was no longer a barrier between her and Damien. He was her shield, her escort, her champion. He faced her, and for the first time, the professional mask dropped entirely, revealing a deep human gravity in his eyes. He addressed her, his voice a calm, respectful baritone that sliced through the suffocating tension. "Mrs. Hawthorne, are you ready to leave the honorific, landed with the force of a coronation?" Mrs. Hawthorne. In that moment, he didn't just affirm her identity. He annulled Isabella's usurpation and condemned Damien's betrayal in a single stroke. He was not removing a problem. He was escorting the queen from a court that had turned toxic. Damien staggered back, a wounded, uncomprehending animal. "Thorne, you're fired," he howled, the words a hollow echo of his former power. "You're finished. I will ruin you. I will dismantle your entire pathetic company." Marcus ignored the tantrum as one would ignore the ravings of a drunk. He offered his arm to Ilara. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice a steady anchor in the swirling vortex of her life. Ilara, whose body was a live wire of adrenaline, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, took his arm. The solid grounding feel of his sleeve was the most real thing she had felt all night. As they turned, a unified gasp swept the room. Damien, driven by the last vestiges of his primal, brutish ego, lunged forward. "You're not going anywhere with him." But the Kingfall Protocol was in effect. David and Leo moved with a beautiful, terrifying economy of motion. They didn't lay a hand on Damien. They simply materialized in his path, two silent, impassive sentinels in black suits. Their hands were clasped before them, their posture relaxed, but unbreachable. They were a human wall, built not of muscle, but of absolute loyalty to their commander's code. Damien pulled up short, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. He was trapped on his own stage, a king in a court that no longer recognized his rule, forced to watch as his wife, his possession, walked away under the protection of the very apparatus he had created to enforce his will. The ultimate irony was lost on him, drowned out by the roaring in his ears. The walk out of the ballroom was a journey through a living wax museum. Faces were frozen in expressions of shock, glee, pity, and fear. The air crackled with the frantic, silent typing of thumbs on phone screens and the glare of illicit camera flashes. Elara felt 1,000 invisible eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. She wanted to shrink, to run, but the firm pressure of Marcus's arm was a constant reminder. You are not a victim. Not anymore. She kept her chin high, her gaze fixed on the ornate double doors that represented her escape. With each step, she could feel the shackles of her old life falling away, clattering silently onto the polished marble floor. The moment the doors swung shut behind them, the opulent chaos of the ballroom was replaced by the cathedral-like silence of the grand lobby. The abrupt peace was a physical shock. Elara's knees buckled, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation, evaporating in an instant. Marcus's grip tightened effortlessly, holding her upright. "Easy, ma'am. I've got you," he said, his voice low and reassuring. He guided her to a velvet-upholstered bench in a quiet, shadowed alcove. The adrenaline was now draining from her system, leaving behind a deep, trembling exhaustion and the terrifying, exhilarating reality of what she had just done. "Thank you, Marcus." She whispered the words, feeling small, inadequate for the magnitude of his actions. "You sacrificed everything." "I upheld my contract," he corrected her gently, his eyes meeting hers. They were clear, steady, and held no trace of regret. "My primary duty of care clause is explicit. I began documenting Mr. Hawthorne's erratic behavior and verbal threats 6 months ago after he threw a laptop at an assistant. I knew an event like this was not a matter of if, but when. My team has been preparing for this contingency. The car is waiting at the West Service entrance. We're taking you home." The ride back to the penthouse was a journey through a dreamscape. Elara stared blankly at the blur of city lights, her mind replaying the scene at the Gala in a disjointed, chaotic loop. Damien's face twisted with hate, Isabella's mask of composure shattering into dust, the collective gasp of the crowd. In the quiet darkness of the SUV, Marcus laid out the next steps with the calm precision of a general briefing his troops. "When we arrive, the penthouse will be secure. All digital and physical locks have been changed. A full sweep for listening devices was completed an hour ago. 2 of my best female operatives are on site. They have already packed Mr. Hawthorne's personal effects. A legal team is on standby. A forensic accounting firm has been retained. Your friend Chloe is waiting for you." He had planned a revolution. The sheer scope of his preparation was breathtaking. He had not just protected her, he had armed her. The private elevator opened directly into a home that was both familiar and irrevocably changed. The air felt lighter. The oppressive weight of Damien's presence was gone. On the large mahogany desk in the foyer, where Damien's family crest had once been proudly displayed, now sat stacks of neatly packed leather suitcases and boxes. It was his entire existence in this home condensed and ready for removal. It was a sterile, efficient exorcism. Chloe rushed forward, her face a storm of emotions, and wrapped Elara in a fierce, protective hug. "I saw it, Larry. The whole world saw it. You were a damn lioness," she sobbed, holding her tight. That night was a sleepless vigil. Chloe made tea, while Marcus's operatives, a comforting and unobtrusive presence, patrolled the perimeter. Elara's phone, when she finally dared to turn it on, was a portal to a global firestorm. News alerts screamed from its screen. Hawthorne humiliation. Titan. toppled by pregnant wife at Starlight Gala. Blue dress, red face, inside the affair that shook Wall Street. The video was everywhere, a viral supernova. She watched it once, a strange out-of-body experience. She saw not herself, but a woman she didn't recognize, a figure of impossible calm and chilling resolve, and felt a surge of pride that was quickly followed by a wave of terror. She had not just left her husband. She had publicly executed his reputation. The war was just beginning. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Catherine Harding called. Her voice was like aged whiskey and polished steel. Mrs. Hawthorne, Catherine Harding. Let me first say, that was the most magnificent public detonation of a hostile spouse I have ever witnessed, and I was at the Rockefeller divorce depositions. There was no preamble, just a swift, appreciative dive into strategy. Here is the state of play. Damien's prenup is a fortress designed by sadists. However, you just blew a hole in the main gate. His legal team will argue for its enforcement. We will argue that his public act of extreme emotional cruelty using a corporate subordinate in a conspiracy to psychologically torment his pregnant wife constitutes a material breach so profound it renders the entire document void. We will file for divorce this morning on grounds of adultery and cruelty. We will also file for an emergency protective order and an injunction to freeze all non-corporate assets pending discovery. I have a team of forensic accountants, the best bloodhounds in the business, ready to tear through Hawthorne Dynamics books. We are going to find every shell corporation, every offshore account, every hidden asset he thought you'd never be smart enough to look for. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and strategy sessions. Elara, flanked by Chloe and protected by Marcus's ever-present team, moved with a newfound purpose. She was no longer a passive participant in her own life. The fallout for Damien was apocalyptic. The story didn't fade. It grew. The board of Hawthorne Dynamics, a collection of old money puppeteers who valued stability above all else, summoned him to an emergency meeting. He strode in arrogant and defiant, expecting to intimidate them into submission. Instead, he faced a tribunal. Led by the board's chairman, a man who had been his father's closest friend, they informed him that his public behavior had erased billions in shareholder value and exposed the company to a catastrophic crisis of confidence. His position as CEO was untenable. They invoked the board's emergency powers. By the time he left the room, his keycard was deactivated, his corporate accounts frozen, and he was being escorted from the building he built by a security team that was not his own. The Titan had been unceremoniously deposed. 3 weeks later, in the serene, sunlit quiet of a private birthing suite, far from the noise of lawyers and headlines, Elara gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. As the nurse placed him in her arms, the tiny, warm weight of him against her chest, the entire world fell away. She looked down at his perfect, slumbering face, his tiny fingers curled around hers, and a wave of love, so powerful and pure, washed over her, cleansing the last remnants of fear and bitterness from her soul. This was why she had fought. This was what she had protected. He was not the Hawthorne heir. He was not a pawn in a dynasty. He was her son. "He needs a name," the nurse said gently. Elara smiled, tears of joy tracing paths down her cheeks. "His name is Ethan," she said, her voice clear and strong. Ethan Vance. She was reclaiming her own name, her own history, and bestowing it upon her future. Months later, the salt-laced breeze of the Pacific Ocean drifted through the open French doors of a modest but beautiful home in Carmel by the sea. Elara sat in a rocking chair on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. Ethan slept peacefully in her arms. The divorce was settled not in a bitter court battle, but in a quiet, complete capitulation by Damien's side. The evidence Catherine Harding's team had unearthed was so damning he had no choice but to surrender. Elara was now an independently wealthy woman, but the money was secondary. It was a tool, not a definition. She had established a foundation to support women and children, escaping abusive homes, giving them the legal and financial resources she had been so fortunate to have. Her life was no longer about galas and appearances. It was about walks on the beach, the laughter of her child, the company of true friends, and the profound, unshakable peace of knowing she had faced the dragon in her life, not with a sword, but with the simple, unbreakable power of the truth. She was no longer a character in Damien Hawthorne's story. She was the author of her own. Elara Hawthorne's story isn't just about a cheating husband or a stolen dress. It's about the moment a person decides they will no longer be silent. It's a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about wealth or power, but about the courage to stand up for your own truth, even when your voice shakes. From the quiet desperation of that penthouse to the stunning confrontation in the ballroom, she took back her narrative piece by painful piece. And in the end, it wasn't a prince who saved her, but her own unbreakable will and the quiet integrity of a man like Marcus Thorne, who chose honor over a paycheck. Her journey shows us that sometimes you have to walk into the storm to find the peace on the other side. What would you have done in Elara's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and empowerment moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true-life dramas. Thank you for listening.